Hello and welcome to Remember the Film, the podcast where we're having an old friend for dinner. My name is Josh Bradley and I'm joined by my co-host. What?
That's good. I like that.
We're having an old friend for dinner.
It got me. Yeah, I know, it got me.
I'm joined by my co-hosts who are currently rudely interrupting me, Jeff Grizz Ulrich.
I was not interrupting that much.
My other co-host who was Hugo Panay.
Hello. Hi.
Hello. And we are delighted to be joined today on Remember the Film by a frequently cited listener and first-time guest and one of my oldest friends, TJ Keeley. How are you, TJ?
I am doing great, Josh. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited. It's
Hell yeah.
weird, cool to listen and then be like, I've seen them.
You're going to hear your voice, yeah. Yeah, next time you listen to this episode. And if any of Mr. Keeley's students are listening from Althoff?
Yes, that's right.
Althoff.
In Southern
Shout
Belleville.
out to them.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, shout out to the students in Mr. Keeley's class at Althoff.
And don't forget to do your summer reading, please.
Yes, and do your summer reading and watch movies to enrich your life. Like Silence of the Lambs, for example, which is what we're discussing today. Silence of the Lambs, the movie from 1991, directed by Jonathan Demme, based on a novel by Thomas Harris, adapted by Ted Talley. Shall we go right into it?
Yeah, let's do this.
Yes. Silence of the Lambs was released on Valentine's Day, 1991. Aww.
Very romantic.
Budget of $19 million, and it made $130 million at the box office. It was a huge hit. I was just looking at the box office page, and they didn't have any data for international. So did this not get an international release, potentially?
No, it did. It's just saying on Wikipedia, which is not the most reliable source, it says 272 million worldwide.
So 272.
That's not bad.
Which is a big number.
That's a substantial hit. So this was an enormous hit. And fun fact, the studio Orion was basically going bankrupt as the movie was being released, and they had to just limp along to not go bankrupt so they could do an Oscars campaign because this movie would go on to win many Oscars, and it's the rare movie to be released in February and then win Oscars 13 months later because of the Oscar window. So Orion Studios had to really limp along to just stay afloat so they could promote Silence of the Lambs for the Oscars. And it worked because this is one of 3 movies ever to win the Big 5 awards, which is Best Picture, Best Director, one of the Best Screenplay awards, Best Actor, and Best Actress. And of course, I'm going to ask.
I knew you were going to ask. Oh, I'm so mad.
TJ, you can't answer. we'll go to you if no one else gets it. Grizz or Hugo, the other 2 movies to win the Big 5 awards.
Oh, God.
I'm sorry, the Big 5 awards we say Picture, Director, Screenplay, Actor,
Picture, Director,
actress.
Screenplay, Actor, Actress.
He's stalling.
I want to say...
One from the 30s. This is the harder ones from the 30s.
Okay, one for the 30s and one from...
I'm not going to tell you the second one yet, but the 30s, anybody?
Gone with the Wind? Romantic comedy? No, that's not Gone with the Wind.
TJ, go.
Comedy.
It happened one night.
TJ,
romantic comedy.
It happened one night.
Okay.
Frank Capra and what's the girl's name? The woman's name? Claudette?
Claudette Colbert and Clark Gable.
Clark Gabes. And the second movie to win the Big 5 was in the 70s, a bigger movie.
Godfather
one of my
Part
favorite
2?
movies, honestly.
No?
It's either Part 2 or 1. Godfather Part 1?
The year after that, actually. The year after that.
73.
The actor was Jack Nicholson.
Jack?
The director was Milos Forman.
Yeah,
Go
no,
ahead,
I'm lost.
give it to TJ. Sorry. Give it to TJ. You're making us look stupid.
Chief voted, Nurse Ratchet. Can we watch the game?
There we go. One flew over the cuckoo's nest.
Someone get me a goddamn wiener before I keel over.
You're going to do this now. You're going to do this now.
One flew over the cuckoo's nest to those not getting our references.
Yeah, that's good.
I wouldn't have
Fletcher.
guessed. Great movie, but I wouldn't have guessed that it won all 5 awards.
I love One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Future film to remember, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, for sure. So, American Beauty damn near did this, but Annette Bening lost Best Actress to Hilary Swank for Boys Don't Cry. Otherwise,
can I just say I'm really glad that Annette Bening lost, because I would not like American Beauty to be in the company of those other movies, because I did not like American Beauty. big It Happened One Night fan, are you? Yeah. Well, I haven't seen it yet. But by reputation, you know.
So you might also be pissed off that one also is in the top in the Big 5.
We'll see. I'm a lot more lenient for old movies.
I like American Beauty. I'm way lower on American Beauty now than I was when I was 17, 18, but I liked it a lot back then.
I get you know how I feel about movies where they are kind of up their own butts with stuff.
Yes, I actually do like those kind of movies though. That's where we differ, I guess.
Definition of movies that are up their own butts? Is there a definition?
It's like they're so
they think it thinks it's pretty important.
They think they're important when they're making the movie, and
I hate the word pretentious, but American Beauty I think is actually fairly pretentious. I'd give it that. What do you think, TJ? No?
That's for another time.
Okay.
I do find it a lot harder to watch after we learned certain things about Kevin Spacey.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, it's really, really uncomfortable now.
Yes.
But
which, honestly, like, this is the last thing I'll say about American Beauty. It was getting more uncomfortable anyway the older I got, because when I first saw it, I was closer in age with, like, the girls in the movie, so because I was close to their age, I saw them more as adults. And, like, as I got older into my 20s and watched it again, I'm like, ew. Like, they're 16.
They're
17.
Children.
Like, yeah, exactly. It's disgusting. So it was getting worse. It was aging terribly just as I was aging. And then the Kevin Spacey stuff, now it's probably unwatchable now, to be honest. I haven't tried to watch it since then, but you're probably right.
7's fine, though. Where he plays the worst human being you've ever met.
Where he's a murderous psychopath. Yeah. Speaking of murderous psychopaths, segue back to Silence of the Lambs. This was based on a Thomas Harris novel, and it was a series of novels, right? He wrote, 4 of them? Red Dragon, Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal Rising, and then Hannibal Rising. And I believe he only wrote the novel Hannibal because Silence of the Lambs was such a big hit at the box office. It made $270 million. So, like, the studio was like, hey, Tom, you got another one in you, right? And he's like, okay, you gonna pay me? Sure, let's do it. And the movie Hannibal came out 10 years later, and Anthony Hopkins returned, but Jonathan Demme elected not to, and Jodie Foster elected not to, so they replaced her. And I haven't seen Hannibal, but I hear it's...
I have.
What do you think? It's okay?
It's one of those aggressively okay films, because you see it in the context of what came before it. So it's like, oh, this is... Like, if it was a movie on its own, I'd be like, oh, this is a cool little 7 out of 10 thriller, it's fine. But with the context of Silence of the Lambs, it just kind of looks a little silly.
From what I hear, it's a lot grosser, and it goes like a lot more over the top than what Silence of the Lambs does. So basically, my take is they probably took the wrong lessons from Silence of the Lambs and took what they thought people wanted more of and just did that. And it didn't necessarily work. But it worked a lot in Silence of the Lambs because this movie, again, won the Big 5 of the Oscars. It was an enormous box office success, and it's probably one of the most influential movies in the 90s, I think it's fair to say. All the lists that we always talk about, AFI Top 100, it was number 83 on the 97 list, jumped to 74 on the 2007 list. That's way too low in my opinion, only 74. On the IMDb Top 250, it's number 21. That's a little better. On the AFI's like little sub lists they do, like of their top 100 thrillers, it's number 5. And AFI also has like a top 100 heroes and villains lists. Clarice Starling is number 6 on the heroes list. That might be a little high. I think
that's a little high.
But yeah, and Hannibal Lecter is the number 1 villain of all time on the AFI Top 100 villains list.
And I don't know how I feel about that either. I like Hannibal Lecter a lot.
He's ahead of Darth Vader.
That's my issue.
Okay. There you go.
Maybe I'm just too big of a Star Wars fan, but still.
Yeah.
Same.
But yeah, I do think that this was, and we'll talk about this more later in a negative sense, but I think this was one of the more influential movies of the 90s, if not of the last, 50 years. Because, if you go to IMDb, there's a section on every movie's page that's called Connections, and it's, connections to other movies or shows. So basically any movie that is referenced by Silence of the Lambs will appear in this section, and any movie that references Silence of the Lambs will appear in this section. And when I was an intern at my job in college, I would spend most of my day on IMDb. Any employer listening to this, forget you just heard that, but I would spend a lot of time on IMDb looking at those kinds of things because I was bored. And so I'd look at connections pages a lot on IMDb. I've never seen a connections page with more movies that reference this movie, a list longer than Silence of the Lambs. It is pages and pages and pages of movies and TV shows that somehow reference Silence of the Lambs, either with an episode title or an allusion to Dr. Lecter, or this became the go-to cultural reference point for cannibalism, for crazy doctors, for any kind of like psychological disorder, I feel like.
And even like just the mask that is in the movie for like, I don't know, 5 minutes, maybe it became an iconic image that you can recognize, and anybody who sees it, oh, that's Hannibal Lecter, but they might not even have seen the movie. It kind of transcends.
Dumb and Dumber has a thing in it.
Even if they had seen the movie, like especially if they had seen the movie, they would not necessarily associate that mask as Hannibal Lecter because it's barely in the movie. It's in like one,
but it's iconic imagery though,
right?
Like,
I mean, it's yes.
Fun fact. Oh, sorry. Yeah. I saw this movie the first time, probably way too young to see it. I think I was like 12 or something. And
hold on, real quick, Hugo, how old were you when you saw it? Because you see movies too young.
Yeah, I was probably like 10, 12. 10, 12, that I can see that.
And, well, I think it's because I saw the AFI list, and I was like, oh, this Hannibal, I gotta watch this. And my dad was like, sure, you can watch this on Halloween, like, go rent it. And it got to the part where, like, I'm not spoiling anything, but like as soon as you see him like looking in his cell, and I'm like, nope, waiting for Dad to get home. But the next Halloween, then I was Hannibal Lecter for Halloween.
Oh my
God!
God,
I got like the tape thing and the mask, whatever, as like a 12-year-old kid.
So
that's scary.
I'm gonna put you guys on the spot. Can you think of any like completely unrelated TV show or movie that like somehow references Silence of the Lambs? I have an answer. I have a couple answers, actually.
I'm pretty sure there was an episode of Family Guy that referenced it. It might have been multiple episodes.
Yes.
There might be multiple episodes that
let
referenced it.
Let me give my answer to give you an example. There was an episode of Rugrats, the TV program for young children, Rugrats, that I was an enormous fan of. There's a dream sequence where Tommy's afraid of going to the doctor, and in his dream, the doctor's like a scary guy, and he says, "I'm your old friend, Dr. Lecter." And like, I saw that when I was like, I don't know, 7, and I didn't see Silence of the Lambs for another 10 years at least, so like, probably 10 years later, I was like, Tommy Pickles is Doctor from Rugrats.
Because the kids usually love like those Silence of the Lambs references. They eat those up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the 7-year-olds in the audience like, oh yeah, I've seen that movie. He eats people's faces.
Tommy was right to be afraid.
But his doctor ended up being a nice guy. That was just a dream sequence that made him afraid. Regardless, like this is a very influential movie. It was a big deal. I don't remember when I first saw it, but I was at least like aware of it long before I saw it, and that's partially because like the sequel came out when I was like 11, Hannibal. So I remember seeing previews for the sequel and being like freaked out by it, and that probably delayed me seeing Silence of the Lambs by a few years, I would think. But I eventually did see it.
I think I might have seen the sequel before I saw this one, because I distinctly remember seeing Hannibal on TV as a kid, and I don't remember when I saw it, but I definitely must have seen it around the same time. The sequel is grosser, but it isn't as creepy. I feel like for a kid, this movie has some really tense, creepy scenes, and even just every scene that Hannibal is in is so unsettling that it would scare you more because just of the tension than the actual scares.
So good segue. I want to ask you guys this before we get into the plot, which is this is listed as like one of the first horror movies to win Best Picture at the Oscars. Is it a horror movie or is it a thriller?
Okay, so this is what I was going to say. I did not see this movie. The first time I saw it was, I think, last year, 2 years ago. Two years ago was the first time I'd seen this movie because I don't like horror movies. And so I'm looking through the IMDb Top 250, and I've been working my way through that list for years. And I skipped over Silence of the Lambs because the first thing it shows up listed under is horror thriller. I like thrillers, but I don't like horror. So I skipped it. I was like, I'll come back to that at some other time. And that was years that I kept delaying watching this movie because of that. And then I watched the movie, and it's not even remotely a horror movie.
I mean,
the elevator sequence in the second act.
See, I just think that's more thriller. I mean, it's a very scary thriller thing, but it's basically a chase sequence. They're tricking each other.
The tableau of this guy. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, thrillers can be scary, but the reason I don't like horror movies is because of there's so many there's supernatural things.
Yeah.
That sort of stuff is what gives me nightmares at night, which is why I don't like horror movies, because I want to have a good night's sleep. So. But thrillers don't make me that scared. I'm like, oh, well, there are serial killers in the world, and I've been sleeping fine this whole time, so I'll be okay.
I don't necessarily think just gore means a movie is horror. I don't know. There's many movies that are not that are thriller and do have gory scenes, but I wouldn't categorize as a horror film. And I think for me, the parts, again, as I said, the part that scared me the most were just the conversation with Hannibal Lecter and how he was getting in Clarice's head and how creepy he was that way. So the actual scenes that you could consider closer to horror, I didn't find really scary at all. And I think it's definitely a very tense thriller, and it kind of skirts the line of being on the horror side, but I wouldn't call it a horror movie.
I just wanted to say the thing that scared me the most in the movie was the way he says Chianti.
Yeah.
Which is that's a mispronunciation, right? Isn't it?
No,
isn't it Chianti? Isn't I thought it was Chianti.
Chianti. Yeah, but it's pretty good. Like, it's not bad.
Okay.
It's better than I would expect.
It sounded to me like a mispronunciation, and it like
I agree.
Chianti.
Can I jump in on the horror thriller debate?
Jump in on anything, yeah.
Yeah.
By the definition Grizz gave, I think I would agree with you. However, I would say I think it is a horror movie. And I think, at least myself, I'm initially hesitant to give it that label because when I think of horror movies, we tend to think of, Saw, The Conjuring, the stuff like that seems like much the way comedy is sort of designed to make someone laugh, that these are designed to make someone, scream or shake in terror, whatnot. But I think a key for this movie is it doesn't have a whole lot of terror. It has a lot of horror. And the difference being that initial sort of, at least for me, that initial sort of visceral reaction of like, a jump scare or, oh my God, I can't watch this is not really there as much, but that deeply unsettling, whatever it is afterward that I had when I saw like Midsummer or Hereditary, those types of movies that you're like, wasn't really scary, but I don't feel good right now. I think is a key to it. And it's playing a lot in gothic romantic horror, and it's playing a lot with like the Frankenstein myth, I think. So maybe that's just the English teacher part of me categorizing it that way. But
that's exactly why we're having you on today.
But I just have to disclaimer it as like that's not the definition that necessarily is popular. But
clearly someone agrees with you because this is categorized largely as a horror movie, and most people do, I think of it as such. Even though I think, like, from a literature perspective, I see exactly what you're saying. From a visceral film perspective, I guess I see more as thriller, but it can be both,
Yeah, in terms of the, like, have some friends over, get pizza, watch a horror movie, I don't think this is the type of thing you're looking for, but...
Right.
Yeah.
Which is why I think it's weird. People watch this movie so much at Halloween, and, like, I just, I think maybe it's because it's so much a police story that... I find it less horror, like it's not like Scream or Day of the Dead or anything like that, where it's like, this is obviously horror. This is this is a Law and Order episode that went really dark.
Yes.
The one where he eats his victims.
I was gonna say is that talking about how influential this show is, or this movie is, a TV show that owes everything to Silence of the Lambs is Mindhunter on Netflix, the David Fincher show. Even the title of the show is almost an allusion to a previous movie in this same novel series, which is Manhunter. And that show Mindhunter is almost exactly down from the premise to the execution to the tone to the visual style, borrowing from Silence of the Lambs. And you would never call Mindhunter a horror show.
Right.
It's a procedural thriller show, and so this is like a police procedural movie. What do you got, Grizz?
I just wanted to say, when you said a TV show that owes everything to Silence of the Lambs, I thought you were going to say Hannibal. Yes, you're right, Josh. Good point.
Or the current CBS show Clarice that I hear is terrible, but I haven't watched it yet. Yes,
I'm sure it is.
TJ, were you aware there's a TV show on CBS right now called Clarice that's just a procedural about Clarice Starling?
I'm afraid not. No.
Well, I'm glad you didn't know. Now you have to know.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry to tell you that.
I would say that it's not just Mindhunter. It's also just every TV show that's ever been about profiling as a concept.
Yes.
I feel like owes so much to this movie because I don't think it was something that that in the in pop culture was as well known as it is after this movie's existed. I don't know if you've seen Manhunter.
I haven't.
The movie that is, the kind of prequel, non-prequel of this movie.
The Michael Mann movie.
Yeah. And it's not as good, but it does have similar elements, but it wasn't. I don't think it was as big a deal as this movie was, both critically and just in terms of success. So I feel like this movie kind of popularized that idea of, the FBI goes to the small town and looking for serial killers. And, the TV show Criminal Minds is literally this movie. Every episode is this movie.
Yes.
It's exactly this plot, kind of. So it's really influential on TV in general for a lot of procedurals.
But this is why I don't think it's a horror movie. All these cop shows are based on it. Like,
it definitely has horrific elements, but I feel like in the broadest sense, you could say that it is a horror movie. But when I think of it as a film, I think, oh, this is one of my favorite thrillers. Mystery thrillers. I don't really think of it in terms of horror, even though I understand what TJ says, and in the broadest sense, it kind of is.
Would you say, TJ?
Yeah. Oh, I was just also thinking of probably True Detective.
Yes.
I think that was a lot of much as well. And in the 6th and 7th and 8th, I forget how many episodes there are in there. It gets into some big time, like, kind of Buffalo Bill descending into the chasm of his lair sort of business, where it also then gets not supernatural, but so deeply psychologically terrifying that it's completely like subjective at that point. And you start to go, the voices in the cavern down there, that you're like, we're no longer really in the realm of total reality. And I don't know. I just thought, sorry.
Yeah, that I think the 7th and 8th episodes of True Detective are borrowing so heavily from the third act of Silence of the Lambs. Anything else? Can we just get into the plot a little bit? Because we're kind of talking about like profiling serial killers and stuff. Let's talk about like what this movie actually is. So we open in Quantico with at the FBI training facility, basically, with Clarice Starling. And I love these opening images with the title credits over Clarice basically training in this foggy Virginia bog, essentially, and she's sweaty, and she's so small compared to the other FBI trainees, and she's called into Clarice Starling, played by Jodie Foster.
Sorry, can I jump in, Josh? Sorry. 2 things. One, this has nothing to do with anything important, but those titles are like very Twin Peaksy.
They're so Twin Peaksy.
Oh, good. Okay, no. But the other thing I was going to say, Josh, I know you love opening images.
Yes.
And the opening image, we're on the top of the hill, and there's the 2 ropes coming up, and Clarice is climbing up out of the, up a hill, just like she's pulling, what's her name later, Catherine, out of the well,
Martin.
And the other rope is abandoned and it's vacant. So it's, to me, I look immediately and I'm like, this is a resilient person who's going where no one else is going to go, right?
That's
so there's your opening shot.
Of the opening image.
There you go.
See, I was actually looking at the opening image, and all I saw was fog in the woods. I didn't even put together the 2 ropes. So very, very good there.
And now Josh will never look at the opening scene the same again.
Did I just out-opening scene you, Josh? That's your territory, man.
You out-opening scene me. You just planted a flag in my territory, and I don't know what to do now. I'm a man without land.
My thing is way more vanilla. Like the first thing I thought was, Twin Peaks. And then I was like, oh, this is Dagobah. Oh, this is Luke training again. Oh my god.
I like the Dagobah thing. That's good.
It's so uncanny if you think about it.
Mine's even worse. My first thought was, I should really pay attention to this because Josh is going to talk about the opening scene.
And then you didn't?
And then I was like, I spent the whole time focusing on, I got to be impressed by something. What am I impressed by?
So Clarice is called into Jack Crawford's office. What's his role? Is he just like the head of Quantico? Like what's his deal?
I think he's head of this particular regional unit.
I think
unit.
He heads.
Yeah.
No, I think he heads the profiling section.
He's a muckety muck. Head muckety muck.
In their conversation, they talk about him being a professor. So he's kind of an academic as well as an FBI agent. So he was a professor.
But he's a professor at Quantico.
At Quantico. So I think he's kind of head of that profiling section, and he's kind of recruiting her because she's a brilliant student.
And he's so milquetoast, isn't he? My goodness.
Yeah.
It works in balance to the rest of the performances, but man, whenever he's on there, I'm just like, this is like, yeah.
So, had this movie been made in 2021, this character would have been played by Guy Pearce, and I will hear no other options besides Guy Pearce. But in this movie, he's played by Scott Glenn. Do you guys know Scott Glenn from anything? I only know him from The Leftovers as he's in the right.
Yeah.
What? Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I only know him as Justin Theroux's dad in Leftovers, but
Oh.
I know you said you don't want to hear anyone else, but I wanted to throw out Ben Mendelsohn.
no, he's too menacing. He's not milquetoast enough. I'm not even saying Guy Pearce is milquetoast. He just like fits the. Basically, Guy Pearce's character in LA Confidential, aged 10 years, is exactly Jack.
Oh,
Crawford.
okay, that's fair.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I'm going for here. So Jack Crawford calls Clarice into his office and says, "Hey, you were a student at UVA, and I taught there, and you were a good student. So you want to work in my unit? So I'm going to send you to talk to this serial killer, Hannibal Lecter." Back up. We have a serial killer on the loose who is abducting women and dumping their bodies in rivers, and we don't know anything about him. We need to figure out who this guy is. So to figure out who this serial killer Buffalo Bill is, we want to talk to this other serial killer we have in captivity, Hannibal Lecter, because Hannibal Lecter was a psychologist by trade and a serial killer. So we want to see if he can give us any insight into the patterns and habits of Buffalo Bill, so we can figure out who this guy is. And Hannibal Lecter is an interesting guy with interesting abilities to get under people's skin when he talks to them, and he's not willing to talk to many people, but you're an attractive young woman. Maybe if I send you in... He doesn't say this out loud, but this is kind of the subtext. Maybe if I send you in, Hannibal Lecter will talk to you. So that's what he does. He sends her to Baltimore, where she meets Dr. Chilton, who is... quite the creep.
The worst.
Who sucks.
He's a sleaze and a mustache twirling sort of, like that shit poop-eating grin he's got on his face.
You can say shit, it's fine.
You could say that.
We'll talk about him in a second, but just real quick, as Dr. Chilton leads Clarice to Hannibal and gives her this amazing disclaimer before she talks to him, like, don't pass him anything, don't accept anything he passes to you, don't go
do
too
not
close
touch
to
the
glass.
do not approach the glass.
yes. I wish I had like the direct lines in front of me, but I don't. But he basically says like he attacked a nurse recently, and I love the way Jonathan Demme does this. He says he did this to her face, and Chilton just has a photograph like in his breast pocket, like on hand, ready to go, pulls it out, shows it to Clarice. We never get to see it, which I think is super effective. And in this moment, the lighting is all red from the underground, like the red lighting just bathing everything. And we're holding on Clarice's face as she looks at the photograph. And Dr. Chilton says, as he did this, his heart rate never got above 85, even as he ate her tongue. And holy shit. And this is all, first of all, this is the first 7 minutes of the movie. We're about to meet this guy. We haven't seen him yet. And like, what a fucking, pardon the cursing, what a fucking intro to the character of like getting this little disclaimer before we meet him. And then
it's also, funnily enough, she will go on to break every single one of the rules there.
Yes.
Basically immediately.
Whether in this first scene or in like 15 minutes later, but she basically breaks all of them. If we can back up a second, I think an element that we kind of glossed over is the initial conversation between Crawford and Jodie Foster's character, Clarice Starling.
Starling.
I think it already sets up this movie and how creative it is visually.
I was going to come back to this, but yeah, let's talk about it now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, because I feel like right away it's throwing at you some really interesting weird shots. All of their conversation is filmed in this 1-2 shot that, usually the classic 1-2 shot is the character's kind of diagonal to the camera. Over the shoulder and talking to somebody else. But this one has like direct to camera look, and it's...
Well, yes and no. The male characters, whoever is talking to Clarice talks directly to camera. Mm-hmm. Clarice herself looks just a bit camera slightly, right.
Yeah.
Not quite directly in the camera, but people talk. The camera is from Clarice's point of view for these conversations, which is extremely meaningful, and we can talk about it now, but I also want to talk about it more in detail later. But
for sure.
Yes.
But I think just the creativity of the shots that this movie is going to have throughout is very subtle, because it's never doing these big sweeping camera movements. It's never doing these really long takes that you notice right away. But the way the frames are composed is always very deliberate and kind of creative throughout the film.
Yeah, real quick, shot by Tak Fujimoto, who we mentioned last week, because he shot Ferris Bueller, and he also would go on to work with Jonathan Demme on a lot more projects, and a lot of other directors too, and I can't remember them offhand at the moment, but I think that, like...
He's awesome.
They do that direct-to-camera thing with Clarice, 3 straight conversations with Jack Crawford, Dr. Chilton, and Hannibal Lecter, and it gets increasingly creepy with each one because like she goes into Jack Crawford's office, and like it's a little bit intimidating. She was called out. She was doing her exercises. She's sweaty. She's kind of discombobulated, and she is called into the head Mucky Muck's office, and like is a little nervous. Like that's a little unsettling at first, and like he's looking directly at the camera, directly at her, and it's unsettling for us too as the audience. And then she goes to Baltimore and talks to Dr. Chilton, who comes onto her and with the creepiest smile and the greasiest hair and the glassiest eyes, and he says, "Baltimore can be a fun town if you have the right companion." And his smile and his teeth are so he's creepier than Hannibal Lecter, to be perfectly honest. But like he is, and especially the fact that if this wasn't direct to camera, it would be a third as creepy, if that. But because he's talking direct to the camera and like the way that Anthony Held, the actor, delivers his lines, 100 out of 100 on the creep factor.
Well, are we going to get to later? I think you mentioned you wanted to talk about male gaze later.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. Okay. But that's a big part of this.
Okay,
yeah.
Can I throw something in real quick? When Chilton's talking to her, I was always when I was younger and I watched this and didn't really understand how movies worked. I could feel myself getting more and more anxious because we're about to meet Hannibal, but this time I really focused on how does this work? And a lot of it I think has to do with, as Hugo pointed out, the camera by and large does not move a whole lot. It's pretty locked off throughout a lot of the movie, but it's moving quite frantically, smoothly, yet frantically through the corridors, through the halls, down the stairs, etc. as he's talking to her. And he has this monologue rehearsed of the instructions to the point that like he's not pausing for questions, or he is blitzing through this thing and through the gate, through whatever. We get here's that picture I have, and he swallowed it. And the way he says that thing too about like they managed to save one of her eyeballs or whatever. He kind of deliciously just like, aren't you impressed with the patient
he's
that I
have?
He's
so casual about all of this.
Yeah.
Well, he even says it. I forget what the exact line is, but he even says that, like their prized possession in this facility is Dr. Lecter. So like he views him as an interesting thing to behold more than like he should, which he should view him as a mentally deranged lunatic.
And so you get finally to that moment where Barney tells her, like, I'll be watching, you'll be fine. You're like, no, Barney, she won't.
I'm a lot comforted. I'm way more comforted by Barney than I was by Dr. Chilton.
Oh, Barney's great. But at that
point,
point, there's not like Barney, too little, too late, buddy,
Yeah. Barney, to those who are less familiar, he's the orderly in the hallway where Hannibal Lecter is housed. And like after Chilton gives his very unsettling spiel to Clarice, Barney then directly addresses his camera to Clarice and says, "Don't worry, you'll do fine. I'll be here." Blah blah blah. It's reassuring. Tak Fujimoto was not even nominated for Best Cinematography at the Oscars. Not only did he not win, he was not even nominated. And I'm just like, that's the most horrific thing in this movie is that Tak Fujimoto was not nominated for Best Cinematography.
I think it's another. This is another example of understated cinematography. It's
Is it though?
I mean, we talk about this all this time.
We've been talking for 10 minutes purely about his cinematography in the first 10 minutes of the movie.
But we always talk about a lot of the movies that get nominated are ones that have grandeur to the way things are shot, and this doesn't have as much of that because that would be super out of place in this very personal story that you're supposed to be engaging on a human level with these characters. So that you don't have the sweeping vistas, you don't have the long takes, like it's So I think it's a little more subtle and it gets overlooked, and that sucks.
Yes.
Was the editing nominated?
The editing was nominated. It lost to
the editing's great.
JFK.
Oh,
JFK, which also won cinematography for our guy Robbie Richardson, previously mentioned on this podcast before. Sure. All this build up to her meeting Dr. Lecter, and also another great build up after she talks to Dr. Chilton, after she talks to Barney, she walks the hallway and like looks in from her point of view at the other patients in the same hallway, and they say some pretty dark things to her that we can't repeat on this podcast. And then she finally gets to Dr. Lecter, and while the other people in the hallway are behind bars, he's behind glass. And while the other people in the hallway like run up to the bars to like say creepy things to her and like taunt her, Dr. Lecter's standing in the middle of his room, calm, courteous, and says, hello. I don't even know what he says. But
he doesn't say hello, Clarice. Everyone always says that's the line, but that's not the line.
Yes, he just says hello. Good Good evening. That's probably it.
But the other thing that's unnerving about it is the minute we turn the corner, he is like he's looking right at the camera. So it's like he was waiting, obviously, but you're just kind of like, oh, already I was scared for her, and yet you are already steps ahead. You know,
he has the upper hand in the conversation before we even see him. He has the upper hand in the conversation, which is unsettling. And
I think what this scene shows you is, I think somebody mentions in the movie they don't even have a word for what he is. Like it's unclear what his mental illness would be in this situation. It's unclear, and what makes him scarier than the lunatics and maniacs who are into the other rooms is how composed he is. He's, almost soft-spoken at the beginning when he wants to be. And it makes him much scarier than just the crazy people in the other rooms.
Yeah, he's a different kind of menacing.
So I feel like, we need to speed it up, I think, but we could spend the rest of the podcast just talking about this first conversation between Clarice and Dr. Lecter.
Can I just, if we're going to kind of breeze through this, I just want to say one thing about this conversation is that while he very clearly does have the upper hand, Clarice holds her own in this conversation remarkably well, considering this is something that's very new to her. And I think that sets up her character is that, yes, this is all new experiences, but she faces them boldly.
Not just in this conversation, but in the previous conversations too. Like when Dr. Chilton is coming on to her, no matter how many times I see this, I'm always impressed with how she handles him, which is patronizing but polite, but she rides the line of giving him just enough flirtation back, but not encouraging him, shutting him down, but not in a way that makes him feel bad. And she doesn't have to do that. And if I was in her shoes, I would just be like, fuck you. Again, sorry for cursing, but that's what I would say. And but she's again, kind of is playful back to him, but still in a way that shuts him down. What do you guys got? Sorry. Hugo, go.
I feel like for me, it's one of her main traits throughout the movie is how well she's able to navigate a world where she's usually the only woman around, and how she's able to deal with men who have either belittle her or treat her with gloves just because she's a woman, and the way she's able to assert herself within that world while also maintaining a sense of femininity and at the same time projecting strength, and at the same time not being too confrontational about it, because she knows in many situations she wouldn't be able to win that confrontation because of the prejudice that she might face. It makes her character so likable and intelligent, and you're always in her shoes throughout the movie, so you always feel, oh, this is cool. She's actually making fun of these guys without them noticing. And it kind of makes you like her instantly.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so much. I love Clarice as a character, and I loved her more this time because I was picking up on a lot of the things that Hugo was just talking about, and what Grizz frequently mentions, which is watching smart people do their job well, is quite pleasurable. And even though Lecter says to her, and I kind of wondered this throughout, how much of Crawford's interest in her is sort of sexual, but what the movie doesn't really show any reason to suspect that. No, she's just really, really damn good at her job too. It's not like there's a bunch of other really good cadets around her, and he's like, no, the hot one. She's, other than looking behind the door and getting shot in the one time, she's really, really good at her job. But one of the things I think is so interesting about how this movie approaches feminism is that it's pretty clearly a feminist movie, and it's hard to miss that message. But it does it in this way that, I feel like only Jodie Foster could really do, because she has this mixture of intelligence and vulnerability where, her voice almost crumbles, with everything she says. There's this pushed whisper to get out. But at the same time, she's incredibly courageous. And so what's cool, I think, about her is that she's strong in a uniquely feminine way, not in this sense of there was this huge in the late 2000s, early 2010s of pushing strong heroines, strong female characters, which basically was defined in a lot of the movies as you're stronger by more of a body count than you have, right? So let's write this traditional male action hero and then just change the name from John to Jane, and we've got a strong,
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm not saying that, women can't kick ass, but what I'm saying is there wasn't really this investment of what it meant to be sort of like strong in a feminine sense. The strength was only really defined by how close it was to traditional modes of masculinity. And that works so well in this film, I think, because of, the themes of surface appearances, the theme of becoming, that is something that's essential to Buffalo Bill and is essential to the metamorphosis of the pupa, as he says. But also then, sorry, I'm going all over the place. But just, I love the way that she approaches, like you guys said, sort of putting the men in their place without there having to be this, like, if this were made now, it'd be Brie Larson, and she'd have to have this, like, speech about, like, I haven't worked so hard to be treated like this, and women can do it. Like, it would just have to be, like, really obvious. But that really wonderful moment where she says to Crawford in the car, when he apologizes, and she says, well, they look to you about how to act. And he doesn't get he's like, yeah, fair point.
Point taken,
and just what you learn about that, as well as how much respect he has for, because that's also, again, a cadet sort of putting him in his place. But anyway, sorry.
It was a very respectful conversation there, and and I that's one of my favorite scenes in the movie, because she is educating him. Because granted, like, I mean, he's an older guy. He's probably been doing this for a long time. There probably haven't been a lot of women that he's worked with, because they've, this is a newer thing that they're being put into these roles. So he's having to learn. And I kind of like that he's getting that opportunity, and she's teaching him, how to be a better guy.
I think the Clarice Crawford relationship is one of the more interesting relationships in the movie, and one that I haven't really given a ton of thought to, but like, I think that I should probably watch this again and just kind of focus on just that, because it is kind of fascinating. The respect they have for each other, but also like the pandering he kind of does a little bit, but like the way she kind of puts him in his place, as you guys just said. And also, like, not to spoil anything, but at the end of the movie, their last conversation is he shakes her hand, says, job well done, and says, your father would be proud of you. And like, it's such a clear, like, paternal kind of like, your father would be proud of you, and I'm proud of you, and I'm your new father figure kind of thing. Like, wink, 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 wink. But also, to go back to what TJ said, I love how, to kind of put a bow on what you said, the way Clarice knows how to navigate male-dominated spaces as a woman. Mm-hmm. And, like, we'll talk about male gaze later, but, like, that's maybe, like, my biggest takeaway from this movie, even more than the serial killer stuff, is, like, how she's able to do that. And also, like, that's kind of the whole reason Crawford sends her in there, and the whole reason that Hannibal Lecter gives her the time of day more than anybody else is because, as a woman, she brings a different approach to talking to him. She talks to him differently than probably the men that try to talk to Lecter do, and he can recognize that immediately, and maybe uses that to advantage, but also she uses it to her advantage as well.
And what's really curious about it too is, like, you have Buffalo Bill. We'll get into later sort of what his diagnosis is or whatnot, but a lot of it has to do with this perhaps dysmorphia between his maleness and femaleness that he wants to acquire. And then, Clarice, while she is, like I said, distinctly feminine, and she's a beautiful lady, knowing Jodie Foster and knowing Jodie Foster's persona and her background or whatnot, there is also kind of a masculinity to her, which I think is interestingly balanced with Hannibal Lecter, because, within that name, Hannibal, the cannibal, the conqueror, right? Hannibal the Conqueror. But he also, like, his voice is just this far away from, like, Katharine Hepburn. And
love your suit.
He plays rather decadent and almost homosexual.
Yes, the way he says, love your suit to Senator. Senator, one more thing, love your suit.
Yeah.
He's for sure not a traditionally male villain. He's for sure not the strong man that overpowers his victim with strength and clubbers them to death. And, like,
except for that one time where he does that.
Well, yes, but it's like it's still his cunning that gets him to that point where he's able to do that.
Yes.
Like, he's, he has to get out of that situation because of his cunning. Like, his mind is his biggest weapon. His perceptiveness is his biggest weapon, and the way he speaks does have some elements of femininity in it. He does have a vanity to him that the other male characters in the movie don't have, and I think it's a very good juxtaposition between them. And I completely agree with the fact of the casting. I think Jodie Foster is so perfect for this because she's small, and her voice is not weak, but it's not a loud, strong voice that you notice right away. She has a very distinct accent.
Yeah.
But it is a vulnerable voice. And the way that there's many scenes in this where she's just standing there in the middle of these giant burly cops, and she looks so tiny, and then the scene afterwards, she's putting them all in their place, and they're like, "Oh, people, you have to leave this room. I'm in charge now."
Or they're absolutely terrified, like the cops. And the one guy's like sweating and he's like, "Is it true he's a vampire?" And then even mustache guy, he's like, "That's Pembry, damn it!" Like that mustache is something. I mean, holy cow! Sorry,
I want to try to move as long as we can because we're only like 8 minutes in the movie at this point. But a few things about this first conversation. 4 things I want to say is, number one, I'm hanging on every word that Hannibal Lecter says in this first conversation, as is, I think, everybody. And he has powers of perception that have been talked about before we meet him. So like everything she says is also very meaningful because you're thinking like, how is he going to use this against her, or will he use this against her? And also, just a little fun factoid, when he mocks her accent, apparently that was an ad-lib, and like Anthony Hopkins didn't tell Jodie Foster was going to do that, so that's why she was like taking it back when he does that.
Well, and you mentioned he's so perceptive, and that's, I think, the other part of his name, right? Is you got Hannibal, Cannibal Conqueror, Lecter is a reader, and then you have Clarice Starling, and Clarice is there's clarity and there's purity in Clarice, and Starling is a little bird. You fly home now, little Starling, fly.
Yeah, very good.
And I love the way he goes. He's so kind to her, kind of, in a way, at the beginning, and then there's a moment where he switches to creepy, and he's so good at that. And the performance is so fantastic.
It's when he slams that drawer back.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh god.
Yeah.
And he instantly, and then he's talking about the way she smells, and he's getting onto her because she's, "Oh, you're just a cadet. Why are you even here? Just leave. Fly, little birdie." It's such a good switch.
I think this might be a good time to mention that Anthony Hopkins won Best Actor for this, despite being 21 minutes of this. He's not in much of this movie. I think it's one of the, I don't know if it's like the least screen time for a lead actor performance, but it's one of them. But like, I don't have a problem with that though, because like he's such like a presence in the movie that like even when he's not on screen, he's the focus of the first 10 minutes of the movie, even though he doesn't show up until like minute 11, and like. Because, like, he's, in these scenes, like I said, I'm hanging on every word he's saying. I'm hanging on every word he's hearing also. And so, this movie isn't really about him. Like, the plot itself is about finding a serial killer that's not Hannibal Lecter. But, like, still, I mean, like, when I think of the great acting, I mean, Anthony Hopkins won Best Actor, and he just won Best Actor again this year. But, like, in the pantheon of great performances of the last 50 years, Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter is one of the first things that comes to mind for me. I don't know about you guys. What do you think?
No, for sure. Absolutely.
It's interesting that he was nowhere near the first choice. Gene Hackman bought the film rights and wanted to play Hannibal Lecter with Michelle Pfeiffer as Clarice. And then they tried to
That's a different movie.
They tried to get Jack Nicholson. I think there was maybe Warren Beatty or somebody else was in there as well, or James Caan. Maybe James Caan. Someone, but Anthony Hopkins was like way down there, and when they picked him, it's because Jonathan Demme liked The Elephant Man. And if you watch The Elephant Man, there's none of the, Anthony Hopkins sort of after this, like, doesn't really get out of the shadow of this. Like, he played Fracture, like lots of movies where he's this intelligent creep. Other than Maniac, which was the ventriloquist one that he had before this, in Elephant Man, he's the kindly, soft doctor. There's much more of the father in Elephant Man than there is any of Hannibal Lecter.
I think there's something about his British accent that enhances everything that he does in this movie. I don't know if I'm just biased, but I feel like an American accent in this would not be as unsettling.
So... I don't want to do like a beat for beat plot summary, but basically Clarice she's very smart and like pulls like kind of like riddles that Lecter says during the conversation to like search this storage unit, and finds like an old victim. They find a moth in the victim's mouth, and then like connect the moth to Buffalo Bill the Killer, I think, or something like that. Like apparently that's one of Buffalo Bill's victims. Then we see Buffalo Bill actually in action. I think the first time we see him, we see just his eyes. Was it through night vision goggles or through binoculars, something like that?
It's night vision goggles.
Night vision goggles.
Night vision goggles. The first time we see him, though, we only see his eyes. We've mentioned the word male gaze. We'll talk about it more, but like we see his eyes. And later on, we'll talk about like Buffalo Bill seeing things and coveting things and then abducting them. And what he sees is a woman driving in Tennessee singing Tom Petty in her car. And then he pretends to have a cast and moving a couch and lures her over to help him move the couch. PSA to all young women, but also anybody, don't help a guy move a couch into a van. Don't get into the van if you're helping move the couch, because she uses that to abducts her. And she says, are you about a size 14? And then beats her with his cast. And then Catherine Martin is out for the count and abducted. Yep. And her name is... And then he checks the tag. She actually is a size 14. Real quick, Ted Levine as Buffalo Bill. Holy crap. What a performance. I think, TJ, I don't know if this was on mic or off mic, but you said that Anthony Hopkins could not get out from under this performance as Hannibal Lecter. Ted Levine could not get out from under this performance as Buffalo Bill. This performance basically made and ruined his career, I think.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say so effectively because, Hugo, one of your favorites, Shutter Island, when I saw it in the theater, when he's in the car with Leo and he's talking to him about like what man is really like, I was like, I'm thinking this guy's just going to tear his head off. Like he's so scary. Oh gosh.
Oh yeah.
When he shows up in Heat as like one of the detectives in Heat, when he shows up as one of Christopher McDonald's henchmen in the movie Flubber, which is what I know Ted Levine from. He gets hit in the head with a
Flubber takes a dark turn.
He was also the police captain in Monk.
Oh,
the hit TV series Monk.
Did he ask anybody if they were a big fat person, Monk? Are you a big fat person?
Big fat person.
I'll say this, it's a thankless role.
It is, man.
Especially, obviously we're going to talk about this, but especially in retrospect and in the way our culture has moved forward and has kind of moved past certain kinds of representations. But I think given what the movie is and the direction that he is given, he does do his best. He is a very creepy, scary villain. And I think he counteracts Hannibal as a villain in the movie really well. Because we get the two sides of what a serial killer can be. Where Hannibal is, as we said, is so soft-spoken, so intelligent,
refined,
so articulate, classy, yes. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, we get this guy who lives in like this dingy, kind of messed up, gross home, and puts his victims down a well, and it's kind of disgusting, to be honest. And you get these different sides of what a serial killer can be, and the movie explores that. And I feel like he, as thankless as it is, he does the best he can given what the role is.
Yes, and I'll shout out now for future discussion, Buffalo Bill is, quote unquote, problematic, as the kids say, in 2021, and we'll talk about that.
I will say he's not based.
He's not based, as the kids say. I don't know. Kids don't say that. As adults,
I say that.
Were once kids say, yeah.
I might have an unpopular hot take on that, but that's just a little teaser for later.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
You're going to regret inviting me on, Josh.
So let's see. Where do we go from here? So he abducts this woman, Catherine Martin, who turns out to be the daughter of a U.S. senator. So the FBI, Jack Crawford, was already after Buffalo Bill, but now this case is even more high profile, which makes the stuff with Lecter all the more urgent. I don't want to go plot point by plot point, but she goes back. Clarice goes back to Lecter, asks him about the body they found in the storage unit and the significance of the moth, and Lecter says something about how Buffalo Bill is obsessed with metamorphosis. Yes. And I mean, is now the time to talk about it? I
feel like it is, because this is the scene in the movie.
In this scene, Lecter specifically does say he's not a transsexual, but he thinks he is, or something like that. But so like Lecter points Clarice to say there's three major hospitals in the United States for sexual reassignment surgery. That's what it's called back then. Now it's called gender reassignment surgery, or gender confirmation surgery is what it's called now. So check he probably applied and was rejected. So check Johns Hopkins, checked these other hospitals. I bet you'll find someone with a criminal record, and that's how you'll find your guy. Also, like the moth they pull out of, they find another body, a woman who was dumped in a river. They pull her out. They find a moth in her mouth as well, and like it's a specific kind of moth that you can only buy in Asia, so like that's another clue. So basically the possible transsexual angle, sexual gender confirmation surgery, and the moth in Asia that you can only buy in certain places, like those are the clues that basically eventually crack the case for them. But that's probably it for the non-spoiler section of the on the outline. I didn't really make an outline for the non-spoiler plot summary. I just put it f***ing rules, because that's my summary of the plot for the non-spoiler section.
I feel like this might be, since we've gone through the scene, I feel like this might be the time to maybe talk about the trans representation in the movie.
Sure, let's talk about trans representation. Go ahead.
The movie goes out of its way to tell the audience that Buffalo Bill is not a transgender character. He has very complex psychological issues with his own
kind of psychosis,
identity, and feels some sort of dysphoria, which wouldn't be classified as gender dysphoria. But with him not having maybe the help that he needs throughout his life, he comes to believe that what he's feeling is gender dysphoria and that he wants to become a woman. I guess we are going into spoilers, though, because it's hard to discuss.
Yeah, it's already spoilers.
In order, since he has been rejected for an actual gender transition, he essentially what he does, he becomes a serial killer and he kills these women. He asks, "Are you a size 14?" because he wants women that are as big as he is, because he wants to use parts of their skins to create essentially a new skin for himself, and in that way affirm what he believes is his identity. Obviously, okay, so the movie explains it over that way. However, it still kind of continues the stereotype of the transgender killer, which is something that, you know, the history of pop culture and cinema has gone through quite a lot.
Not just transgender killer, but just the queer-coded villain that dominated popular storytelling from like the 30s into like the 2000s even. Just even in Disney movies, Ursula in The Little Mermaid is queer-coded. The villain in Pocahontas is queer-coded. Even Scar in The Lion King is a little bit queer-coded.
The Maltese Falcon. Peter Lorre's character wears an exotic perfume, and he's referred to by Humphrey Bogart's character as a rather queer fellow.
Yes. And if you want to know more about just trans representation media and the stuff like that, I'd just like to throw out this documentary that is on Netflix. It's called Disclosure. It stars
Laverne Cox.
Laverne Cox, but you know, I think Jamie Clayton, if you've seen Sense8, is also in it. I believe one of the Wachowski sisters is in it as well. But it stars a large number of actors or people who work in show business who are trans, and it essentially narrates the story of trans representation in media. And this film is one of the films that is represented, because despite the fact that it goes out of its way to explain what it's going for, the fact that it even has to do that shows you that it kind of, even the filmmakers were aware that, this is kind of continuing this negative stereotype, and we kind of are aware of it, but at the same time we're adapting the book, so we kind of have to put this scene in it. So it is kind of problematic, and you kind of have to rationalize it in order to not get too wrapped up into this element of it.
It's kind of the Psycho thing. In the movie Psycho also, they have like a doctor explain what's going on with Anthony Perkins' character.
Norman Bates.
But like, even so, Norman Bates, even though they have the explanation both in Psycho and in Silence of the Lambs, the audience kind of like, largely ignores the explanation in a lot of cases. Like, we'll link this in the show notes for this episode. But Emily Vanderwerf, a writer for Vox, has a very good Twitter thread about her thoughts on this whole transphobia issue in Silence of the Lambs. And basically, she says like Jonathan Demme clearly is trying to make it such that Buffalo Bill is not trans, that he highlights that in dialogue, but like even though the filmmakers try to put that in there, the audience still kind of walks away with the idea of like trans people are psycho killers. And so like despite intentions matter less than like the actual outcome, the actual takeaway from the audience. So like you could say that Silence of the Lambs, because it is among the most influential movies of the 90s, people probably did take the wrong lessons away from this. So, like, it's problematic in that sense, even if the filmmakers didn't intend it for it to be. Again, tension doesn't matter as much as outcome. So,
and the thing is, even with that dialogue scene, you kind of have to be in tune with what it means to be trans, and you need to have a very modern sensibility towards it, which I don't think the general public in the 90s probably had. I don't think people have it
Certainly
today.
Did not.
So I speaking for myself, I didn't notice this until, I don't know, I saw this movie again 3 or 4 years ago when, I was more informed. I had educated myself about these things, and that was when I noticed this for the first time. So before that, I probably took away that message from it, and I thought, this is a psycho trans killer. But unless you're really in tune with these themes and you've kind of educated yourself on them, it's kind of easy to miss that element of the film.
And the thing is, people are going to talk about Buffalo Bill when they talk about this movie, and they're almost never going to take a moment to be like, but remember this one line of dialogue where they explain that he's not trans. They're going to talk about all the things he was doing, and that part's not even going to come up. So that's what we're talking about, the cultural impact. Even though they tried to say something about it in the movie, not enough. Because
also the way his performance is acted, and even just the visuals of him, dancing around, wearing a very feminine clothes, wearing makeup, tucking in the same way as Jay and Silent Bob. It's like that's what sticks with you way more than the one scene of dialogue where they explain what he's actually going through.
I'm gonna bastardize something that Bill Simmons said on a Ringer podcast, but like any demographic that Buffalo Bill is associated with is not gonna come off well just because Buffalo Bill does not come off well in any sense. So whether Goodbye Horses is a casualty of Buffalo Bill, transgender people is a casualty of Buffalo Bill, people with Ted Levine is a casualty of Buffalo Bill, people with long blonde hair who are balding is a casualty of Buffalo Bill. But also, to your point, I think Jonathan Demme, again, tried his best, or maybe not his best, but he tried to set aside, separate transgender people from Buffalo Bill. But like at the same time, he spent the rest of his career both explaining and also apologizing for this. And his next movie was Philadelphia, which was about a gay man with AIDS, which also may not hold up great with modern sensibilities about gay people, but at least he was trying. So like watching this with a modern perspective is not the best, but it's something to keep in mind, I guess. It was a different time. Not that that's an excuse, but TJ, what do you got on this?
Yeah, I have a lot on this. Just because I think it's really interesting. So let me start with, this movie is not woke by any stretch of the imagination as it applies to this. Disclaimer done. Sure. The other disclaimer I need to put is, as a cisgendered male, the way that I see it is this way, but I am... joking aside, I am aware that while my read is going to be sort of highly academic, it's going to come somebody who is feels offended by the representation here is going to have a very different perspective than I have, and I'm not meaning to invalidate that. Something I think that's worth talking about as well is there was no sort of Laverne Cox in 1991, right? So this was this was not the first, but a very clear and prominent representation of someone with, if you want to call it gender dysphoria, whatever you want to say
in a very popular movie, too.
In a very popular movie. Also in 1991, where you are, at this point, in the midst of the Bush years, but on the back of the Reagan years, where, famously there's tapes leaked where Reagan is laughing about the quote-unquote gay disease. doing nothing about AIDS. So the 80s and the early 90s are a really, really violent and horrible time for queer visibility and queer representation, in particular with this idea that it's pathologized, that it's some sort of disease, whether it's psychologically pathologized or whether it's something that can be writ on the skin in the form of AIDS lesions, etc. Which then I think is what's so interesting about this Buffalo Bill and his killing as a sort of gothic romantic metaphor.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And here's where I want to go with that. I earlier brought up Frankenstein. That's playing in the Frankenstein myth. Buffalo Bill, Hugo used the word disturbing, I think, earlier. I want to use the word grotesque as well.
Yes.
He's a monster, okay? And monster in the sense of, I'm pulling from Jeffrey Cohen here, but sorry, I'm getting super English teacher. I apologize, but
that's completely fine.
Monster, Latin monstrare, it's to show or to demonstrate. And that's what monsters do when we understand them within like the Victorian sense. They're grotesquely deformed, like the Frankenstein monster, or like Hunchback of Notre Dame, Victor Hugo, your namesake there. And their visual grotesquity, their surface level grotesquity, is often then mirroring or obscuring something more interesting going on in the inside that is actually more human. So the outside appears not to be human, but the inside is human. And thus it's drawing this uncomfortable collapse between what we saw as easily definable boundaries. Boundaries of class, boundaries of race, boundaries of sex and gender, which is where I think Silence of the Lambs comes in. And I want to steal, if you'll let me quote here, from Jack Halberstam, who wrote this book called Skin Shows, and it's the technology of monstrosity, I think it's called. Skin shows, of course, being like shows of skin, but also what does skin show, right? Perfect. Right. Hey. And when
English teacher.
Halberstam himself is a transgendered literary critic. So he's writing here, in Silence of the Lambs by Jonathan Demme, a serial killer known as Buffalo Bill collects women in order to flay them and use their skins to construct a woman's suit. Sitting in his basement, sewing hides, Buffalo Bill makes his monster a sutured beast, a patchwork of gender, sex, and sexuality. Skin in this morbid scene represents the monstrosity that surfaces. And as Bill dresses up in his suit and prances in front of the mirror, he becomes a layered body, a body of many surfaces laid one upon the other. Depth and essence dissolve in this mirror dance, and identity and humanity become skin deep. My subject is monsters, and I begin in Buffalo Bill's basement with his filthy workshop of creation, because it dramatizes precisely the distance traveled between current representations of monstrosity and their genesis in 19th century Gothic fiction, where the monsters of the 19th century metaphorized modern subjectivity as a balancing act between inside-outside, male-female, body-mind, native, foreign, proletarian, aristocratic. Monstrosity in postmodern horror finds its place in the obscene, immediate, visible. Skipping a little bit here. I'm almost done quoting. Sorry. Skipping a little bit here. She goes back to Silence of the Lambs and says, Buffalo Bill leads one to suppose that a monstrous body is a sex or gendered body only, but this particular body, a borrowed skin, is also clearly inscribed with a narrative of class conflict. To give just one example of deviant class in the film, the heroine, Clarice, is identified by Hannibal as trying to hide her working class roots behind bad perfume and cheap leather shoes. Given the emphasis on skins and hides, it is all too significant that cheap leather gives Starling away. Poor skin in this film literally signifies poverty or the trace of it, as we'll see. However, the monstrous class identity has been almost completely subsumed within the Silence of the Lambs by monstrous sexuality and gender. Again, apologies for the long digression there, but
no, it's great stuff.
Oh, she has great stuff on this, and so what's interesting then is that this patchwork skin suit that he's making is you have to suture pieces together. This is grotesque, and I'm sorry, but it draws attention to the boundary between two pieces of skin. Right? Mm-hmm. And that boundary is metaphorical for the boundaries of class, the boundaries of sex, the boundaries of gender, etc. And so when we have those moments where we're like, I remember when I was little, the part that I really was like freaked out about was when he puts on and he dances and tucked his penis away.
Seeing the skin on the mannequin too, when she's like going through, and like you can still see the breasts on the skin. It's horrifying.
Well, and because what it is then is for us, it's pushing. You look at it and you go, "Well, this man tucked his penis away. Why is that so repulsive to me?" You know, and it's something that you're looking at a body and you're looking at what's happening to a body and what's being writ on the skin. And I think there's a way to read this movie as actually revealing certain anxieties about, you know, the binaries or non-binaries of sex and gender that it exposes by having the monstrous figure embody that, if that made any sense at all.
No, I mean, I want to try to comment on individual things you said, but like what I want to, the larger point that I want to say to put a bow in that is that, yes, this movie's not woke, and it's problematic, you could say, but like there's so much metaphor to be found in his condition, whatever you want to label his condition as. And, you know, one of the reasons I think this movie is... Sorry, go ahead, DJ.
Well, I was just going to say, the thing about label real quick, I'm sorry. Oh, I love that it attempts also to resist label, because label, too, is a form of violent discourse, the pathologizing that Foucault talks about, right? That to be able to name it, to pathologize it, is then to attempt to put it into categories of understanding that exist within sort of hegemonic male culture, right? So then Buffalo Bill existing in this place that is not identifiable. I'm not trying to suggest he's some sort of like queer icon because of that, but I think the movie specifically is trying to point out the violence of that need to pathologize and that need to label and categorize,
to profile, even the whole point of the movie is to profile him and profiling. And what I want to say though is like the literary levels that you can talk about. Hugo, you mentioned him putting on skin, thinking he's transgender, and thinking that physically putting on a woman's skin will like change him. And the butterflies and metamorphosis, and the monstrosity, and the skin, and the symbol of poverty, and the leather, and the women's skin. There's so many layers to be read in this from an academic standpoint, from a filmmaking standpoint, like again, the male gaze, which we'll talk about in a minute. I think how the camera positions male point of view first female point of view, and also like Buffalo Bill as male or female point of view, like, or neither. It's just there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to dissect. We're not the people to do it, but like clearly, as TJ just quoted, there's mountains of academic papers on dissecting the metaphor. And even though like it's not great from a queer representation standpoint, it is very interesting from a metaphor and a literature standpoint, which it sucks that comes at the expense of the queer community to some extent, but it's still very interesting. Sorry, me and TJ have been talking. What do you got, Grizz and Hugo? What do you guys got?
The unfortunate thing is there's all this great metaphor that isn't, it's not intended to be anti-trans or, anything like that, that the average person is never going to go look into. Most people are going to stop at the very surface level, and that's why this movie was damaging.
This made $270 million, and most of those dollars did not go seek out those papers. Yeah.
Right.
You're telling me those people didn't read Jack Halberstam's book, Skin Show?
So that's the thing, is that it's just, while we're talking about how great the metaphor is, how well thought out obviously this is a very well thought out screenplay. There's layers to everything that they show in this movie, but most moviegoers are going to go see this movie because it is a popular thriller, and that's where their depth is going to stop. So that's why this movie ultimately is damaging to the trans community, because despite the intent of the directors, despite the intent of the writers, people aren't going to dive deep enough to get all that.
And despite the academic reasons.
But I think it does implicate the viewer, though, in saying, like, why are you fascinated by this? Do you know what I mean?
I mean,
but like, how many people are actually going to stop and answer that question for themselves?
Well, so
that's a fair point. That's a fair point. Sorry,
TJ, you might remember who said this, but I don't. All war movies are pro-war.
Yes.
Oh,
do you remember who said that?
No, I don't.
But like, all serial killer movies implicate the audience in some way. David Fincher explicitly says this in the commentary track on Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, but like, this does as well. Just any movie that like indulges your sick fascination is implicating the audience in some sense, which I think is what you were just saying just there.
Yeah, what David Fincher says is people are perverts. what David Fincher says is
The
people
Fincher
are
quote,
perverts, and I
Yes.
give them an out to kind of live their fantasies of perversity, or that's not a word, but you know what I mean.
It's not
Without-
a word.
In that quote, what he says is like, why do people look at car crashes as they pass on the highway? You know, that
Yeah.
kind of thing. That's what he is indulging.
That's Poe's idea of the imp of the perverse, precisely too. That it's for him, it's standing on a precipice and going, "Ooh, I kind of want to jump. I shouldn't, but what if I did?" You know. Anyway, sorry. But a fascination with abomination.
There's a morbid curiosity that people have in general, and I think I do understand what you mean, and what the articles that you reference mean when they say the movie is kind of pushing you to ask questions within yourself as to why this fluid identity is horrific in the movie, is monstrous in the movie, as you say, and maybe, as I said, for me, when I watched this movie, 3 or 4 years ago, this was kind of an impetus for me to you watch that documentary on Netflix and try to understand why I had the feeling, this kind of puts me off, it made me realize some internalized biases that I might have had, and it made me want to overcome them and learn about them. But again, I also agree with Grizz when he says, yes, but at the same time, this is a mainstream movie, and the vast majority of the people who are going to watch this are going to see us, he's a horrific monster, he's trans, and he's a trans killer who kills women because he wants to be them. And it's kind of, it kind of also brings into play, some sections of even the feminist movement who are trans exclusionary, as they say, and where the fear, the whole bathroom thing and which bathroom you have to go through, and the idea, even as a woman, I feel threatened by a man who I perceive as a man, even though they are trans, but I see them, the biological man in brackets thing, I see that as a threat to it. There's a whole thing with that, and the movie does a good enough job only if you really look into it and you really want to learn about it and you really want to understand what all the metaphors are. But if you don't, what you're left with, this is scary, he's trans, that's repulsive, and that's it. So the movie kind of, if the movie was made today by somebody who was educated on these subjects, I feel like the metaphor that you're referencing, TJ, could be brought out even more, and it could be a movie that is more of a statement than the movie actually is, in that sense.
So if I could try to, again, put a bow on this best I can, like, I think to talk about just in the movie in the most general terms, and why I think it's honestly one of the best movies I've ever seen, to be perfectly honest, is that you can talk about it in these terms, and you can read tons of academic papers dissecting the themes and from a sociological perspective, from a psychological perspective, but also just at the end of the day, it's just like a straight up really entertaining thriller. Like I watched this week, and I put it on. I asked my wife, "Hey, do you want to watch Silence of the Lambs with me?" She's seen it a bunch of times, and she's not the kind of person to rewatch movies, and she's still like, "Yeah, of course." She doesn't watch movies with an academic point of view like I do as so much, but like it's still just like really entertaining and really good. And it's such a tight hour 54 that like she's like, yeah, I'll watch this. And like, she'll be like, I'll look at my phone while I'm watching the movie. She doesn't really look at her phone much, even though she's seen this movie 5-6 times. She's still just like, it's just so engrossing and so captivating and so it's visceral enough and entertaining enough that it can make $270 million at the box office, but also win Best Picture and also be able to inspire the discourse, to be honest, to use lack of a better word. And
absolutely,
I think that's
it's
really
one
special.
of those. It's one of those they don't make them like this anymore type movies.
I mean, this
is not necessarily true, but it does
true, though,
give you that feeling.
It is true. Like, this movie would not be a theatrical release today. At best, this would be a Netflix movie or a Hulu movie, and only David Fincher or Martin Scorsese could make this, I think. Like, someone with a name attached to them who has a bit of a blank check with the studio could make this. Like, this would not make $200 million nowadays. It would be like, at best, the talk of the internet for a month.
I feel like it
It's on a
depends.
streaming service.
It depends who makes it, because like Gone Girl made 300, 400 million. Those types of movies.
Well, I mean, I just mentioned David Fincher's the kind of guy who could make it. He's
exactly.
one of
So
maybe 5 people who could make this movie today.
Yeah, if there's a big name behind it, but certainly not, the Jonathan Demmes of the world.
And honestly, Gone Girl was 7 years ago, and like the media landscape has changed significantly even in the last 7 years. David Fincher has not released a movie in theaters since Gone Girl 7 years ago, to put a fine point on it.
Absolutely. I see your point.
But so like I said, like it is just like viscerally thrilling and entertaining, but also you can talk about the text in academic terms and the subtext and the context, but also like the filmmaking style, which is why I want to talk about male gaze a little bit, because we already alluded to Tak Fujimoto's cinematography, but we mentioned that like Clarice is so small compared to the large men around her, whether it's the FBI recruits, which is in the elevator on the way to see Jack Crawford, or when they are in, I think, Ohio, talking to like the local police. She's like dwarfed by the police around her. And also like every single man is staring at her in every room she's in. Sometimes, that's often shown from Clarice's point of view, and that people are staring directly into camera, which is just so effective. Jack Crawford, Dr. Chilton, Hannibal Lecter, etc. I just want to talk about that. Sorry, I don't really have like a prompt. I just want to lead into a discussion about this and how Clarice never really looks into camera, except maybe when she's talking to Dr. Lecter, possibly. And then and the one time that I can remember that the camera's from a male point of view is either Dr. Lecter talking to Clarice or Buffalo Bill in the third act when he is hunting Clarice, for lack of a better word.
It's both the times that Buffalo Bill's hunting. When he's hunting at the beginning of the movie, he's looking through the night vision goggles. We see it then. And then again in the basement, he's hunting Clarice, and we see the male perspective again.
Yes.
So, the male gaze in this movie is very overt in those sequences. And literal. And then the other sequences where male gaze is super important are, like we were talking about earlier, the scenes where Clarice is surrounded by male officers or the male trainees, people who are bigger in stature, and they're all looking at her, staring at her, and just from the way they look at her, their eyes are implying she doesn't belong here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Honestly, like I don't know when I first saw this. I was probably 17 or 18, but like I think it was the first time that I like felt the leering gaze of male eyes on me, as not. I mean, it's because we're seeing it through Clarice's eyes, but I've never noticed that before, and it's an experience I'm sure most women are familiar with, and it's interesting how it's able to put us in her shoes like that and help us appreciate that aspect of navigating this world as a woman, basically. And I don't have a point to this, and this is just stuff swirling in my head, but like everything we're talking about can kind of come down to perception, whether it be perception of gender and the what Buffalo Bill wants to be seen as versus what he sees himself as versus what he is seeing out in the world. He is what Dr. Lecter says to give Clarice the hint of who Buffalo Bill is what does he do? He covets. And what does he covet? He covets what he sees. So there's a lot of stuff about seeing and perception and seeing women and seeing men as women, seeing women as men, seeing women and men as whatever Buffalo Bill could be categorized as.
Seeing people as food.
Yes, exactly.
Needing, when the senator is appealing to him, keeps saying, "Catherine, Catherine, my little girl," and Clarice says something effective. If he sees, that's so smart. If he sees her as a person and not an object, then
but he won't, because he calls her it in the scenes. So it's very clear.
In the basket.
Yeah, it's very clear that he sees her as an object and not as a person.
Yes.
Can I try to riff on this a little bit?
Absolutely.
Please do. Yeah, I don't have a point. That's why I just want to get the ball rolling so you guys could riff for me.
Well, I mean, because I'm still struggling with actually getting a theory around this, because there's an interesting, I think, clash going on in the way that the male gaze is used in this film, because this is a male authored film, from the director to the screenwriter to the source material, right? Yeah. To the guy holding the camera. It's all dudes. Yep. Now, Jodie Foster, I know at this time did have enough clout that she was able to sort of like stand up for herself and have a say in character choices and somewhat in the direction of the film. And of course, she becomes a director later. But the movie, I think, interestingly, in putting us in that position of looking directly at her and her always just kind of looking off, and then the men looking at us is it's putting us, like you said, in the position of being male gazed at, and yet we still cannot be removed from the position of the gazer because the camera is imposing. Laura Mulvey is a feminist film theorist who kind of popularized this male gaze thing, and she ties it back to scopophilia in Sigmund Freud's work and in Jacques Lacan's work, where you're...
Of course, yeah, we all know that, yeah.
Well, but she's...
Where'd you find this guy, Josh? He's so much smarter than us.
No. I'm a sad person with no lot. No, okay. But the camera, she talked about the camera as it's penetrative, right? It's actually an assertion of a phallus, and it's voyeuristic. It's scopophilia. It's voyeuristic because you get to look, and you look with the idea of pleasure. This should be pleasurable to me. And so that then also implicates us in the perversion, right? I'm fascinated by this, and I get to look. But then there's a couple times when the movie withholds that from us, like that first time you mentioned with the photograph, and we don't get to see the photograph, And then when you finally do see, like, all of Buffalo Bill's body, you're then kind of somewhat ashamed because he's also looking back in there. He's filming himself, right?
Yeah.
So the way that it kind of turns that around, yet also can't really escape the that the viewer is always a gazer, even if they're trying to put us in the position of being gazed at. I think it's something that's really kind of interesting in the film that I can't quite figure out necessarily.
It's certainly, I do think, just in the sense of the male gaze and the sense of how the camera is used, it is an evolution of the male gaze filmmaker par excellence, I would say, is, for example, Brian De Palma. And there's a lot of the camera work that he does that is quite similar in the film, but the film, as you say, is also trying to evolve past that, because it's doing the male gaze but also at the same time commenting on the male gaze, which is not what De Palma did. De Palma was straight up quite exploitative in the way that it was filmed. It's kind of this midway point, and maybe filmmaking has evolved beyond it afterwards, but it's kind of a necessary middle step to where we can get to more modern movies that maybe are not as male gazy or as exploitative, unless they are so intentionally.
It's interesting to call it a mid-step, because I think that Brian De Palma is an interesting counterpoint. I think Demme is like... Demme and Fujimoto are aware of the male gazeness of this movie and like leaning into it and making that part of the text. Yes. And it kind of makes it in conversation with like the Brian De Palmas from 20 years earlier, 10 years earlier, or the current De Palma movies. So I think it is an interesting mid-step in that point, in the sense that it's at least engaging with the idea and engaging with the concept.
Yeah, it's commenting on it, which wasn't what was happening before. Before it was just, this is how you make this type of movie. And now this is still how you make this type of movie, but we also want to acknowledge it, and we also want to say something about it, and we also want to put a character in it that is from a completely female perspective in a very male world and in a very male section of that male world. So it is interesting in that sense, but I also agree sometimes it's unclear exactly where it stands on that.
Well, I think that the implication for the way it uses male gaze in this is to imply discomfort. And,
yes.
I think it does a great job of that. We feel uncomfortable when all the scenes where we are seeing through Clarice's eyes and everyone's staring back at her. You feel a little bit of discomfort. Like, why are they staring at me because they don't think I belong here? Are they staring at me for sexual reasons? Or, there's, all these things that as a man, I don't typically have to consider. We're getting to experience that through her eyes in this movie. And so in that way, I think it's a very good commentary on male gaze.
Yeah, I agree with you like 100%. I think the only thing that I'm still struggling a little bit with is it's putting us in that position, and yet we never can totally be in that position, even if you're a female viewer, because viewer is one way. Even if they look at the camera, they're not really seeing Grizz. They're looking at the camera. So we're never actually put into the object position. We always still get to be subjects. And so there's an interesting thing where it's like it's trying to do that, but it also knows at the same time that like it's like dead on arrival, sort of. Yeah. And that's what I'm kind of interested about in the movie. But
I mean, yes, we viewers are subject, but also like the subject of the camera is Clarice's point of view, so it's a female view having the male gaze looked back at her, which is interesting. And it's so interesting the way you put the Buffalo Bill like looking at us because he's filming himself and that kind of stuff, and how that is in I don't know.
Well, especially since the implication with that is that he's going to watch it later.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's him with his male gaze looking onto what he is perceiving of himself as a woman.
And being able to then look at himself. Here's the Lacan again, the mirror business. Looking at himself the way that he wants to be seen, right? So he gets to then play it back later and allow the skin to show, to demonstrate, look, I did become who I wanted to be. It's a really interesting, just the inclusion of that camera there is really interesting, I think. But
so I have to move us along a little bit, but again, to reiterate, say it for the third time, that like there's so much like there's academic stuff you can read into with the text and also into the filmmaking, but also like from a visceral entertainment perspective, I want to talk about two sequences of filmmaking, mostly editing though, and that is the scene where Lecter escapes, and then the scene where Clarice and the FBI converge onto Buffalo Bill's house, because they both kind of do the same trick, which is it's edited in such a way to make you believe that one thing is happening, but then actually something else is happening. So real quick, the scene where Lecter escapes, probably my favorite scene in the movie, and maybe one of the most terrifying scenes in any movie that I can think of, is the two cops bring Lecter his dinner. He has stolen a pen from Dr. Chilton, so he's able to pick the lock of his handcuffs. And when the policeman comes and sets his tray down next to him, Lecter grabs his wrist and handcuffs it. And just from then on, for the next like 15 minutes, I'm just like on the edge of my seat, and shitting my pants. And the way Lecter grabs the cop's face and eats it, not very graphic necessarily, but still like pants-shittingly terrifying. And then the point of view of the camera is Lecter raising his club and clubbing the other cop. He's conducting the opera. Exactly. Yeah, like he's conducting the opera he's listening to. And then he stands, he's got blood on his face, blood on his mouth, he just kind of listens to his music and sways his hand. And,
I'm ready when you are, Lieutenant Pembrey.
And he almost forgets about the other cop that's kind of crawling his way away. Still alive. He's trying to get away.
He gets the worst of it. But then from that point, we then cut away from Lecter, and then we're with the cops who are in the building. And for the next like 5 or 10 minutes, we're only with them. And we are kind of, the movie kind of plays a trick on us, the bait and switch, where like they come upon the scene. The one cop is crucified basically up against the jail cell with his innards out of him, and it's a horrifying tableau with incredible backlighting, just incredibly horrific gothic image, to use TJ's word.
Can I say something about that real quick?
Yeah.
I think that moment, a lot of this movie I think is about sort of like the subjective experience of horror, in the sense that it's not really realistic. It's sort of, once you get inside the head of being afraid, how do you experience things that are abstracted and almost exaggerated and blown up? Because if you look at that from a literal standpoint, there's no way he like got that guy up there like that. Yeah. It's like it's really just this outwardly expressionistic sort of look. I mean, what they thought.
I think the implication is that he disemboweled him and used his intestines to kind of hoist him up by his neck. It
doesn't seem to like hold up though, if you think.
Yeah, it doesn't. It's not logical for sure.
All the things Lecter has to do in this sequence, he has to change clothes with two people, put his clothes on another guy, take a guy's face off and put it on his face. Like he didn't have time to do this. I get that, but like
it doesn't matter.
Still,
I think that's what's interesting about it, is that it's not sort of beholden to just like realistic procedure.
But again, the cops come upon the scene. It's horrific. The one cop is, again, essentially crucified and disemboweled. The other cop is lying horribly disfigured in the face and bleeding and dying, but still alive. They take him in an ambulance. They find Hannibal Lecter allegedly on top of the elevator. They shoot him, and it turns out Lecter is actually the other cop. And then we cut to the ambulance, and the cop in the ambulance sits up, takes his face off, and it's Lecter. That shot of Lecter in the ambulance sitting up and then taking the face off is
taking his
the
face
best payoff.
Off.
But
another great moment is just before this, when we see the nurse who got the call that the ambulance is actually carrying Lecter, and so she's running through the corridor trying to communicate with. That's a great scene. Just a great
my
scene
point.
all around.
I bring all that up to it's great. It's great filmmaking, I think, to do like the bait and switch of like you think one thing's happening, then like the reveal, the payoff that actually this is happening. It's just great stuff. And then they do the exact same trick like 20 minutes later with the third act, where the FBI, Crawford and the FBI think they find out who Buffalo Bill is, so they converge on his house, and it's cutting between Buffalo Bill inside dealing with Catherine Martin.
I think the implication is that they did find out who he is, and he's
supposed that's his
actual house.
Yeah, yes,
but actually
he's not
now living in this other house where this old lady was.
Okay, and did you notice
great cross-cutting?
Did you notice what the place is called? It gets that little tag.
No,
Belvedere.
Oh wow!
And earlier in the show, when she's like, that is the Duomo scene from the Belvedere. Do you know Florence? It's just a really cool thing. Sorry.
But yeah, the cross-cutting between the FBI kind of like getting all their guns, converging outside his house, ready to break the door in, and cross-cutting between that and him inside dealing with Catherine Martin, who now has his dog. So he's kind of in crisis inside. His doorbell rings, so he's got to like go see who it is. And like we're also seeing like an FBI guy dressed in like a flower shop delivery person uniform also ringing the bell. So you think it's the same house, and it's not, because when he opens the door, it's Clarice there. And like, holy crap, that's like so effective. No matter how many times I see this movie, when he opens the door and it's not the flower shop guy in the FBI, it's Clarice. You're like, oh no, no.
Well, because also just a moment earlier, you're like, oh, she's not going to get to catch him. She's worked so hard. And then when she's at the door, you're like, run away, girl.
Also, real quick, I wanted to find a place to say this. In some behind-the-scenes filmmaking stuff. So this movie is a tight hour 54. Not an ounce of fat on this movie. I think every minute counts, and it's great. The original cut was closer to 205, 210, and Demme was basically locked with picture. He was done editing. He was done with everything. He had music. He had everything. And he did a screening of just basically like his friends, just to like show them, hey, look how good of a movie I made. And in attendance at that screening was William Goldman, the great screenwriter of many things, including Butch Cassidy and Princess Bride. Or he wrote the book Princess Bride. But regardless, the next day, even though William Goldman didn't know Jonathan Demme, he still called him and says, hey, this is Bill Goldman. I love the movie, but you don't need the scene with Crawford and Clarice at the end of Act 2. Because originally there was a like 8 to 12 minute sequence at the end of Act 2. Basically, after Lecter escapes, the head muckety-muck at the FBI calls Crawford and Clarice into his office and says, you're off the case, blah, 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 blah. Then there's like this big intense conversation between Clarice and Crawford about how like, the mistakes they've made, and like Clarice still wants to go after Bill, blah, 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 but they're off the case, blah, blah, blah. And they basically sets up the third act before she goes to Illinois to like investigate this last piece that ends up being like the key thing. And Goldman says, just take that whole thing out. You don't need it. Or just see what it looks like without that. And Demme's like, dude, we're done. Like, we got the movie. I don't want to do this again. But the next day, just like, to humor Bill Goldman, he sits down with his editor and says, let's just take out the sequence and watch it. And they watched it and they're like, oh, damn. Yeah, we don't need it. This works way better. It's so much cleaner. Yeah. Bill Goldman strikes again. So I just love that bit of trivia, especially because like I love Bill Goldman and respect him so much. And if you want to read a great book about screenwriting, Adventures in Screen Trade by Bill Goldman is probably the best ever. So yeah, I just love that anecdote to set up the third act. Is they originally had like more of a setup, but like I kind of love that it just kind of it flows so nice, and I can't imagine.
And if you're saying they were being told they were being taken off the case, then now I'm wondering like how did they get back on it? Because Crawford does get back involved. Well,
we don't really see how. We just like cut to Clarice. Clarice figures out who he is, calls Crawford, and he's like he already knows who he is. We don't really see how Crawford and the FBI like connect. James, he maybe explains it, but I forget.
But it's kind of a hand wave explanation.
Yeah, they're already on their way to his house when Clarice calls. So like Clarice being off the case, she's basically just like kind of like investigating loose ends to see what she can find.
I think she's investigating because she knows Louis Friend is a fake name, obviously.
Yes.
And Hannibal Lecter has given the senator and the other people fake clues.
Yeah.
But they're also a code, and she kind of realized, because at this point she has kind of a relationship with Lecter, and she figures out from the clues that he's giving the actual clues and how to actually catch the killer.
Right. Well, what she does is she realizes that because the third body they found was actually the first body that was killed because he weighed down the body, and so she connects that to the fact like, oh, he knew this woman, that's why he weighed her down, and blah 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 blah. So like his first kill was someone he knew because of clues that Lecter gave him. He covets what he sees, so therefore he had to know. My point is like you said, Hugo, she used clues that Lecter gave her to like make a break, but she also like didn't like know for a fact like this is gonna be the what solves the case. She just kind of goes on a little hunting expedition to see what she can find, and she ends up solving the case kind of accidentally. Knocks on Buffalo Bill's door, not knowing it's Buffalo Bill's door, and then she puts together within a few minutes of walking inside because she sees moths, she sees sewing paraphernalia, and just like him asking like questions innocently about the case as he searches through his business cards. Does the FBI have any leads? They know any fingerprints? Was she a big fat person?
I just want to say, your Buffalo Bill impression reminds me of Vincent D'Onofrio in Men in Black.
Yes!
Sugar water.
Sugar water.
Fair enough.
You want to put my hands on my head.
On my head.
Like this? Amazing movie, Men in Black, by the way.
Yes.
Just incredible movie. Sorry, go ahead, Hugo.
I think she realizes it's him, and so she pulls her gun on him. And this is another scene where the tiny, soft-spoken woman from the South is in front of a man and shows strength, and she's underestimated. And so he doesn't listen to her saying freeze, he runs away. And maybe if it was a male character, the implication is kind of, oh, maybe he wouldn't act that way if it was like this big burly FBI guy. And then we get the final sequence, which is fucking
great
terrifying.
Cat and mouse scene where he cuts the lights on her, so she's just wandering around blindly, and we see his point of view through the night vision goggles, and like him clicking his gun about to shoot her alerts her to his presence. Then she shoots him first. And Grizz, what do you got?
I just had a question, and I'm hoping that one of y'all who's read about this movie enough will be able to tell me. When they shot this, what was the stage like? Did they actually cut the lights and so that she can't actually see, or is she just acting really, really well that she can't see?
I would imagine the latter is what I would think. I don't know though.
Because the way that she doesn't react when he reaches his hand and it's like inches from her eyes, like if she actually could see that hand reaching towards her, then I'm like, wow, I already liked Jodie Foster, but this is you're overcoming physical reactions that are involuntary now. I don't know. I thought maybe it was actually just shot in the dark.
Could be. I don't know though. And then the movie ends. They catch she shoots Buffalo Bill. They rescue Catherine Martin with his dog Precious. And Jack Crawford congratulates her on a job well done, shakes her hand, says your father would be proud, but really wink wink, I'm your new father figure. And then she has a call waiting for her, and it is Dr. Lecter, who is in some kind of like Caribbean location watching Dr. Chilton, and says, I'm having an old friend for dinner. And then the movie ends with him in pursuit of Dr. Chilton.
And the credits play over the final shot. And it's so good. Because you see him walking behind him, but then it doesn't cut. Like, the whole credits will play on this still shot. And it's so unsettling. It was so good.
When the credits started rolling, I immediately became Marvin Schwartz, Al Pacino's character in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I just lean back and go, what a picture. That's the only thing I can really say. When the credits start to roll, this movie's so good.
Lots of killing.
A lot of killing. Yeah, and that's the Silence of the Lambs. Like, what a frickin' movie, man. Just, again, to say it a fourth time, visceral, intense, exciting, captivating, entertaining, but also academic. Lot of metaphor to be read into. Honestly, one of the best movies I've ever seen. Why don't I watch this every weekend? I don't really know.
Because there's other good movies.
Yeah, but I mean, are not as good as this, I would say.
I feel like you would get tired.
No.
Eventually.
Yeah. I know that a few of you have places to be, so we'll try to wrap this up quickly. Any other abrupt ending, but any other final thoughts on Silence of the Lambs?
I regret waiting as long as I did to watch this movie.
So good, man.
This has happened a lot where there's movies that I haven't watched because as a kid, whether I had any reason to believe they were horror movies or not, if I ever thought it was a horror movie, I put it off.
Yeah.
Was this your first time watching it?
This was my second or third time.
Okay. One thing
I've seen parts of it on television in the past, but
that I missed the boat on this part of the conversation, but there is an interesting thing in terms of like framing and looking. That first quid pro quo conversation. He actually, when he gets to the most personal information from her, he's actually turned away from her.
Yeah.
And there's a moment there when she says she's telling the story, and his eyes, because he blinks so infrequently in the movie, he kind of does like that. And I'm just this time I was like, is that just a little bit of compassion? It's not a word I usually associate with him, but I was like, oh, that's an interesting layer.
I think there's a distinct feeling throughout the movie that he likes her.
Yeah.
As a person.
Oh, absolutely.
Regardless of maybe if they were alone in a room, he might eat her, but he still likes her.
No, when she escapes, she says she's not worried. He's not coming after me. He would think that's rude or something, is what she says. And I completely agree. I have that sense as well.
He would find that uncultured or something like that.
But what's interesting is he still has to call, and he asks, have the lamb stop screaming, Clarice? And he knows. He knows the answer to that because she's still in the FBI. And in calling her and letting her know I'm having an old friend for dinner, it's sort of saying like, you brought one lamb back, but the rest of them are still scattered, and the wolf is on the prowl.
Yeah. Also, this doesn't have not connected to anything else, but I just remember this is when she actually reveals the titular reference, the Sans Lamb story. He's in his like cell with the bars, and like the camera is on the other side of the bars when it's shooting him, and it's on the other side of the bars when it's shooting her as well. So they're both behind bars, visually speaking, and she's like pacing back and forth like she's a caged animal as she has this conversation because she's frustrated, and he's just like still framed by the two bars, and just like, again, great filmmaking. You could read a lot of things and do a lot of things, but great stuff. Should we rank it? Unless you guys got anything else to say about it.
Should we rank it? Yes, we should.
Okay. Number one for me, maybe, I think. Probably. Yeah.
I'm happy.
I'll put this number one. Yeah.
I'm happy with number one.
I would have said 3, but I'm not going to be mad about it.
Okay. Hugo?
Fair. No, look, hey, we have a psychological thriller as number one on the list, so I'm happy. But also, regardless of that's just me liking that genre, but I think this movie is fantastic, and I like it more than Citizen Kane.
So TJ, I'm gonna read the list of films to remember we have in our current ranking, and I want to ask you if you think this deserves to be atop the list. So the current list is, in descending order, Citizen Kane, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Boogie Nights, Network, Chinatown, Bicycle Thieves, The Thing, Your Name, The Departed, The Wind Rises, Sound of Metal, Ensemble, It's a Wonderful Life, 127 Hours, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, Rudy, Another Round, Mank, Trials of Chicago 7, Jackie Brown, Matrix Reloaded, Iron Man 3, Sugarland Express, Perfect Blue, Godfather, Part 3/Coda. What do you think?
The Death of Michael Corleone.
You wouldn't put this above Citizen Kane yourself, would you?
Oh my gosh. I want my name nowhere near any of this ranking business. I want plausible deniability later. It's honestly, that's such a hard question to answer just for the sake of like, what's so interesting and frustrating and difficult about lists is like, are you just picking favorites? Are you just picking what would I watch if it came on right now? Are you just
what is the actual best movie?
And so for that reason, it's so hard. That has lent character to your list, I will say.
I'm just like looking at our top 8 and just feeling such affection in my heart. Top 8 currently: Sans Lamb, Citizen Kane, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Boogie Nights, Network, Chinatown, Bicycle Thieves, and The Thing. I'm just like,
And then I'm really happy with number 9 and number 10 because they're 2 of my all-time favorite movies.
Which of those again? Remind me.
Your Name and The Departed.
The Departed.
The Departed.
2 for you, 8 for me, I guess is what we'll call
Yeah, okay, that. So you maybe stop complaining about the list so much, Josh.
But we're gonna re-rank it 30, right? We're currently at 26.
Yeah, we're not even going to talk about it from my perspective, so it's fine.
Yeah, this is not even anywhere near what Hugo wants.
Well, you have Bicycle Thieves on there, so representing the home country.
It's Italian. I don't care. I haven't seen it before last week. It's fine. I just want to put the Matrix Reloaded at number 1 for no reason other than chaos. So,
yeah, hear that. TJ, on behalf of Remember the Film, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I had a great time.
You and I talk about movies a lot, and we have for half of our lives at this point. We've known each other for 15 years, and we talk about movies all the time, so I was very glad to bring you on. I'd love to have you on again at some point if you'd be willing and able to join us sometime.
Sure.
Yeah, anytime.
Give us some homework before the next time so that we can read some of this stuff.
Yes, Mr. Keeley, please assign
your summer reading for.
Yes.
No, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
I doubt you have anything to promote. I imagine
I have nothing to promote.
Probably not even on social media. Yeah,
no,
nobody can follow him anywhere.
I wish I had something to promote, but I don't.
Grizz, where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter at GoodGameGrizz, and you can also find me on Twitch at GoodGameGrizz. And then I also am now appearing on a pop culture podcast on Pop XP. I'm going to be a permanent stay on their host. I guested for them yesterday, and they asked me to stay on. So
sweet, congratulations!
Find me all over the place. I'm everywhere.
Sweet. Hugo, where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Hugo_Pinay, I believe. I don't even remember my handle.
Yes, at Hugo_Pinay.
But follow me on Letterboxd. My Letterboxd is way more entertaining than mine. My Twitter is all politics. So if you're not into that, don't. If you're not into leftist politics, avoid it. But pretend just like me for my movie takes.
You can find me on Twitter at BroshJadley. You can find my YouTube channel, Movies I Love, and So Can You. And you can follow the podcast on Twitter at RTF_pod. Do not follow at RTF pod. Those are our sworn enemies of the podcast.
Yes.
And send your hate tweets at them. Don't actually do that.
Please don't.
Please subscribe to our YouTube, I guess, and to our whatever podcast feed you're listening to this on. Rate us 5 stars, leave a review, comment, blah, 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 blah. What do we do next week? Do we have it? Yeah.
Yes,
Grizz,
next week. My childhood best friend, Matt Curran, is coming on the show to discuss David Lean and Lawrence of Arabia, which is his all-time favorite movie, and David Lean is one of my all-time favorite directors. You can't see it right now, but I got the Dr. Zhivago poster here on the wall.
Omar Sharif,
fantastic actor.
I'm so stoked for that pick because I saw this movie maybe 10 years ago was the last time, and Josh told me you guys were doing this, so I went and purchased the 4K. I'm stoked for a rewatch.
Nice.
So
yes, I give TJ insight to what movies we will be watching in the future. So if you want more insight, befriend me, and I will tell you.
But yeah, so that's what's coming next week.
At me on Twitter.
That's what we're doing next week.
So watch Lair of Arabia, watch some other David Lean movies, and tune in next week, and we'll see you then. Bye, everybody.
Bye.